Yay, Bing. Okay, good evening, good morning, good day. Welcome to the CEFACT Global Trust Registry project. I'm here with my very good friends, and we all know the Code of Conduct and IPR rules, so I won't dwell on these. And the agenda is much like it has been for the last few sessions, where we kind of look at what the issues were last time, what we've been doing since then, what we need to do next, and that kind of stuff. So the major thing that's happened, to Hans's question before I started the recording, and that we want to talk about, is that at this time, sort of 2 weeks ago, I was offering the idea that I think we're getting near to being ready for public review. And around that time, both Alina and I, in conversation with Steve Capel, who's the sponsor for this under CEFACT, and the CEFACT Bureau Secretariat, Kamala, and others were involved in this conversation about, well, what do we have to do to be ready, and what does that mean, and so on. So what happened was Steve did a review of the website, and he gave us an email, which I then put into an issue. And this was created on the 28th of May. So about the day after, or around the days we were having our prior meetings, right? And so this was all of the kind of suggestions he made to be changes. Now, I won't bore us by reading through. They're available on the GitLab site, but the fundamental sort of changes he was talking about were to do with the way the website introduces itself to the uninitiated reader. So we've all been playing in this sandpit for quite a long time, and we're quite used to the ideas we've been discussing. But what Steve's point was you're going to get people that have never been part of the project team in these conversations, and that they're going to have a very naive understanding, if you like, of what this whole thing is about. So he gave lots of suggestions about how to improve the homepage, how to improve the about page, and how to improve sort of documentation pages. On those, interestingly, so the documentation pages are the ones where Lena principally has been writing things like the target operating model, legal meaning of the DIA, those sort of substantive documents. Those weren't critiqued by Steve. And in fact, when I asked him, do you have no comments on these? He said, no, they look fine. So his primary concern was to make sure that the envelope, to use that phrase again, around the contents was good enough that people get into the contents without being confused. So he gave us this overall.
For me, it's particularly interesting the number 4 pilot page, call to action to real registers.
Yes.
And actually, I will update you now what we were discussing the past couple of days regarding this.
I'd love to give you lots of time and space for that, and if you like, Alina, I'll show you the website stuff, the changes that are. So what I have boldly done,
yes, please,
because this is not what I deemed this to be, was a set of very useful comments on content that isn't part of the deliverable for the project. If you like, the project had a set of deliverables from the original brief that we had to provide, and things like the homepage and the about, those weren't deliverable.
Yes.
Right, so I went ahead and did what I could to address Steve's concerns, and what we now have, if you go to the web page, this is the view of as was and as is, if you like. On your left of your screen are the sort of original web page view when you first went to the home page. On the right is what you'll see if you go to the home page now. Now, to explain that sort of changes, there was this hero image on the left here that I loved because I drew it, and I was very proud of it. But it was described by a couple of people as, no one else knows what you're talking about, John. So I had to think of ways to sort of simplify that image and focus on the things that were actually important, which is for registrars, really. The thing is for registrars. So you'll see that the image on the right doesn't have any of the sort of stuff around supply chain details and so on. It focuses on registrars and registers and the grid thing, and it sort of simplifies a whole bunch of icons out of the image, right? It's just a simpler image. The other thing that Steve asked is the homepage needs to have some explanation about what the heck the project is about. So that's why it's got this thing here. It's got text on the page to say about the project. These are all explanatory things that they're sort of, and what they're also doing is, I guess the main shift is this way of thinking. We had web pages to help the project team understand what we were doing and for us to work together. And now we need web pages to talk to the reviewers so they understand what we've produced as opposed to how we're producing it. So on the left, we had our ethos about the project, understand what exists, explore how things could be done, define recommendations. That's how we were working. And now we need to explain to people why on earth it's worth looking at this web page. So we've got on the right sort of value propositions for registrars. And the sort of promises we want to make. So that's the sort of shift of thinking and presentation that I've done over the last few days. The weeks, days, oh no, it's blurry. The same is true for the about page. So if I click on these about pages, this is on the left is the original about page. I know I apologize for being very small. I just want to give you a kind of a sense of the shape of things, right? So on this about page, the original one, we started again by my rather too fond of the hero image, and then I went to some objectives. Then I had a really complicated looking sequence diagram that again I was quite proud of because it took a long time to produce. What I was encouraged by Steve to do was to talk about the business case, that in the about in a sense the why on earth should you be interested. So this is an image he's used in a few presentations so far. This one on the right that I've got my cursor hovering over. That's a sort of global scale of supply chains and the sort of potential opportunity for improvements and what those might be. So it's from a deck that has a video explainer that, again, there's a link to now. So none of this was in the original about project thing. And I've brought forward some things he liked, like design principles. And I've then gone into, finally, that diagram. And then I go through a very stepwise process of explaining the diagram. There's lots of, I mean, digital content is kind of like free to scroll through. So you can scroll past that reasonably quickly. And then they get to the join the grid. And that's in the separate little sequence diagram. Issue DIAs is a separate sequence diagram, and empower trustworthy digital traders. So I broke that big thing that you saw here into the three parts that it already had. So that, again, is just trying to make things simpler. The other areas that he talks about were the pilots, and this is where Alina is going to sort of tell us the reality. So pilots, there was a thing that Steve was very concerned about. He was concerned that it might not be obvious to people what the difference was between these fake countries I'd created, like Genovia and Atlantis, and the reality, right? So he was concerned that when you went into this sort of, I don't know if this is actually going to work, but if you went into the pilot sort of grid and registrars, you got information that was basically implying that Genovia was issuing DIAs. What we do now is we now call this, it's all inside a sandbox. So we're trying to use the phrase that at least developers are familiar with, the idea of a sandbox. It's not an operating environment. It's not representative of real things. They are sandbox registrars, and these are the sandbox registrars, and there's a sandbox grid. And when you go into the sandbox, it tells you that the contents of this folder are only for test purposes. They're not real or substantive. And that when participating registrars are ready, we'll put them sort of front and center, but not in a sandbox. They'll be on a sort of a proper pilot's grid page. So that was to address Steve's concern around entanglement, if you like, of test data and what should then become real data in the pilots. And I think about documentation and pilot space, those are sort of three big blocks of stuff. The other block of stuff I've done is this. If we're ready for public review, you can now toggle between the documents. When we say documents, these are the deliverable documents inside the folder called deliverable documents. You can toggle between the view of stage 3 draft for development and stage 4 for public review. The main change in this one is the order. I've made the glossary come up at the top. Before it was, for whatever reason, the economic argument was the first document presented. And I've put that one at the top, and then mostly it's exactly the same. Questions on that before we have Alina and pilots? It's a lot of busy work, a lot of refactoring, but nothing substantive in terms of the guts of what we're describing.
John, do you have an idea how many people access these pages?
I don't, I'm afraid. I don't run any diagnostics on it. I suggest, I'd love it to be loads, but I suspect it's not very many. And you know, I think what we're going to have to do with in terms of a public review is, and this will happen if the Secretariat agree, they'll publish that it's going through review, and they'll give links to where you can review and do things. That brings us to another point. If you've noticed how UNTP, the spec, is handling its public review, they've had to address an issue, which we will have. And the issue is, how does somebody raise an issue or a comment or an observation on the website if they're not a member of the project team and have a UN CEFACT login or whatever else we're using to...
Oh, they can't do it?
So we have to, so what they've done with the UNTP specification is to give ways like an email form and other things to make it as easy as possible for people to log in. So we'll put those on our site if we get the go-ahead to say it's under public review. But
also here, I'd be interested to see how many people actually access the website.
I think we're seeing 3 of them that are the most active viewers at the moment. But there's probably a dozen, right? I really don't think it's got a high footprint or traffic. It might well be possible to find out. I can see if I can find out, but I'm not egotistical enough to think lots of people are looking at it. As we can go back to the comments about the content and stuff, and by all means open up a page on your own screens to sort of look at the the un.opensource.unicc, this URL. And by the way, this URL that we've got, Steve's arguing for a much shorter one. If you go to, I'll now flip to another page. If I go to UNTP, you'll see it's got untp.unec.org. Really nice, simple little URL. Steve's suggesting something like grid.unec.org. And yeah, that would be great. For the project, this is after all still a project, it can have a long, messy URL. I don't really care. For the operating environment, should there ever be one, it would need something like grid.unece.org. Okay. Any Alina, what are your thoughts?
Yes, I just wanted to let you know that from Monday to Wednesday, I participated to a UN workshop on land administration that we have registradores organized we hosted in Barcelona, in our headquarters from Barcelona. And there I got in touch with a couple of colleagues that are leading another or one of the main projects Registradores or European Land Registry Association is involved at European level. It's named IMOLA. It's about interoperability among European land registries, and talking to my colleagues that are co-leading or leading that project, the conclusion was that we need to harmonize these projects because, of course, we cannot block the pilot or a project just because, let's say, the comprehension regarding the concept digital identity anchor has not been achieved, or at least the way we would like to. So what I would miss, for example, having a look at this pilot page would be a specific pilot use case. For example, like if the text should give general trade example, in my point of view, supplier, buyer, product samples, credential, and yes?
It does.
Or I think I would add one at least for, I don't know how to do it, if that would fit there, at least for the Spanish registry specific use case. Like to give a concrete example, Spanish or might be another one. For example, let's say Spanish business register entity is issuing or supports a digital identity anchor for a registered company, and then the DI links the company's legally recognized registry identifier to a deed, or a foreign buyer, bank, customs, or whatever verifies the DIA. Like,
yep, yeah, those. I'm pretty sure we've all got all of those already. I'm very happy to add them if we find that they are missing. But I think the observation on my part is it's not for a lack on this website of explanations that people don't get to DIA. As to Hans's point, people aren't coming to this website. This website's not being
this
used.
This is the problem.
Steve's comment to me was, "Oh, I'm not sure the website explains itself." And I wanted to say, I don't think you've ever used the website to explain anything to somebody, Steve. You've used your own presentation decks, and they haven't understood. Now that's a different issue, right? So I think the website's got the material to explain what a DIA is, how it's used, the commercial benefits, and all the other things are in this website. But we would need people to read the website to understand that, and that's a bit of an imposition. And no doubt they'll want an easier form of digestion. A TLDR, too long, didn't read, kind of.
But I was wondering, maybe we could create an example or use a specific Spanish pilot use case, like regarding our, or let's say considering our national
we absolutely can. I'm trying to
legal
find
frame.
in this thing, because I actually saw it a little earlier. There's an example of a registradores sort of data structure inside this text already, and the use of a DIA. So there is already an example in here, and that sort of would be, you know, corrected or improved or whatever it needs to be. But there is one already. But what I think is also true, and I say this to 2 Europeans, is that the focus on Europe is important, but it's not essential. You're not the world, right? So the idea that this needs to be focused on Europe, I think, is something that we need to be quite careful about. It needs to address the interaction with the European economic area. That's a huge part of the world's trade, but it is not the world. And in fact, European companies want to trade outside of Europe.
And this is about just what I wanted to say, that would make life easier for Europeans in trade relationships with third countries.
Yes, but the third countries are not going to adopt a European model of land registration. And they're not going to adopt a European ID or a European business wallet. In fact, they can't. So
I think Hans Space is trying to tell us something. I don't figure out exactly what it is.
It's
well,
always...
I'm surprised about talking about land registration. I thought I'm in a UN CEFACT meeting here, and UN CEFACT is not
we
about
meant business or trade register.
And land.
Yes.
So, but this is a point we have talked about in the past.
As long as land registries become important because they support trade, right? Okay.
Yeah, that's exactly the reason. So this we've had a few.
Yes. This is the idea, because in Europe, like land and business registers usually are under the same umbrella. So
yeah, but
to other aspects, I can only agree to. The Europeans will never be alone on the world doing trade. But
hopefully not.
we interchange with all other folks. So any European solution is useless.
No. It's not useless.
Oh, yes, it is. Let's be very frank about it. Solutions that only work in Europe do not support global trade. Yeah, and there are some that are being brought to the table with a very narrow European perspective.
Yeah, I know. But I absolutely agree with you, Hans, and I agree with Alina. And I want to give the example we've used in the past about why land registry is an important part of the sort of supply chain data. The EUDI, European Deforestation Regulation, that's come into force, and it means that you can't sell meat into Europe without proving that the cattle were reared on. You have to prove it wasn't reared on deforested land, and it ultimately then ends up being a proof of land, a parcel of land that can be proven to have been the part of process of rearing the cattle, owned by the farmer, or all the other things. But basically, an identifier of land can be proven not to have had a deforestation sort of process applied. And that means land becomes part of the thing. So does, at a broader level, of course, country of origin is a big thing right now for trade and tariffs and stuff. So
yes, especially because we disclose your environmental information regarding the plots. And
yeah. So land is in the past, Alina and I have agreed that the idea of organization identifier of some form or other is a key thing, and so is land. As the two, we actually have it's somewhere in this documentation. There's a statement that the grid ultimately would include registrars of things that are interesting for trade or useful for trade data, and the top of the list might be where are you legally registered as an entity. If it's appropriate, what land or direct or address do you have, or whatever it is that's appropriate to the supply of the goods you're providing. Another might be marine assets and ships and whatever else. So there's a sort of, well, we don't expect to start with everything all at once, and we think organization identifiers and land are two obvious sort of first movers. You got the sun in your eyes, haven't you? You're lucky. It's dark here.
No, it's very sunny here.
It's dark and it's winter.
It's a nice day. It feels like jumping on a bicycle and call it a day.
You damn well should. I would if I were able. So Alina, I think this is so important, isn't it? Getting the message across.
Yes.
Is so important. I was so Steve. There's a couple of things that are happening. Steve has also been at a UN-based conference, and I'll just look up my phone to remind myself the exact name of the conference. Messages. He's at UNESCAP, UNESCAP, UNESCAP in Bangkok at the moment, and he's been talking with a number of the other attendees who are representatives of the UN about getting involved in the grid, and so he's trying to round up more interest from other registrars. And that will no doubt generate more questions, right? So he's making some reasonable progress, he thinks, on countries like China, Pakistan, Sri Lanka, and Thailand. And he's reintroduced the conversations with India as well, who were earlier involved in the project sort of a few months ago. So that's encouraging, but no doubt will generate more questions and more requests for explainers, if you like. About DIA. So I agree with you, Alina. If we find the content is absent on the website, we should add it. I would love people to go to the website to read it, but I don't think they will. I think they're still going to expect a personalized explanation of what it means for them, and that's kind of always different, right? Alina's frozen. She looks very amused. Okay, now you're back.
Now I'm back. Okay.
Yeah. You looked amused in your frozen image, which is nice. So I think that's kind of where we're at. And then we've got. So how does this public review thing work, right? It's about 60 days of time from whenever they say start. It's advertised by the UN CEFACT Bureau, and as much, I mean, we all read the publications of the UN CEFACT Bureau with avid interest, don't we? They're not headline news for most people, so they'll advertise as best they can on LinkedIn and wherever else they do it, and we will likewise echo and amplify their advert, and yet we still won't necessarily get a lot of interest, but hopefully we'll get some, and hopefully that'll improve the quality of the content and give us some feedback. In parallel, and again, this is subject to the Bureau's approval, we're going to distill this content into a separate document, which then becomes a recommendation. And if I were to summarize the recommendation in as few words as possible, there should be a grid, and where possible, countries should consider using DIAs. And that's, I think, would be it.
Yes, because the thing is, we cannot, let's say, the implementation of the digital identity anchor cannot be mandatory, or we cannot create an obligation towards the UN member states. But then again, this text, because we were discussing back and forth whether this text should be a recommendation or we should create a new one.
So yeah, we created a new.
That is going to be a recommendation.
So the website as it is would be reviewed. I mean, I'm
yes.
I'm quite kind of over editing the website, right? So the website as it is becomes a thing to be reviewed. We take content from that website to put it into a document that's only, I don't know, 25 pages, 30 pages long, whatever it is. It's not going to be as long as if you took all this content and put it into a document. So we're gonna distill, is the word I'm using, the content from
like filter or however you want to say. So we create this recommendation 52.
Yeah, it becomes recommendation 52. Yes. So you and I need to get a confirmation from Steve after he said yes to the public review that it's yes, prepare a recommendation.
But I have the feeling that he would like us to attend to his recommendations regarding what we would still need to edit from the content of this website.
But we have. That's what I did with the issue. I addressed all of his comments. And his comments were only on what I would describe as the kind of wrapper around the guts of the content, like the target operating model, legal meaning of a DIA, that sort of stuff. He didn't comment on those documents, which are the fundamental deliverables. He was commenting on the abouts.
Regarding the pilots, he also, could we see again his email?
Yep.
Please.
So he had 2 comments on the pilot.
Yes, call for action for real registers and disambiguate content, separate theoretical concept. So the examples from the real world pilots. Okay, move to configuration under completely new headings.
So
like what does exactly he mean? Separate theoretical examples from real world pilots. That
was the point I was making before around this idea that in the previous issue, and you can't see it now, but in the previous version of the website, when you looked at the pilots, you got a grid as a thing, and you got a list of registrars, and the registrars were the ones that are now inside this sandbox registrars. So there were things like this one here, which is the Royal Ministry of Atlantis. These are made up. Quite evidently made up.
Yes, they're not real, but
they even say they're made up. They have a blue banner saying they're made up, and they basically wherever they can, they say I'm made up, I'm not real. And what I did was I took all that stuff and I whacked it in another subfolder called this sandbox registrars and pilot test sandbox. So I pushed it to his words. What his words were, I've separated the theoretical and conceptual structures. Right, so I've moved away this stuff that's testing whether the design works into a thing called sandbox.
Yeah, this is exactly my point, that maybe I would miss a real use case, let's say from Spain or whatever, Australia, I don't know.
There isn't a real use case until a real registrar participates, but there is. You can do an example use case. You could do an example use case.
Yes, this is exactly what I mean, like an example from Australia or
we've
I don't know.
Got in the pilots we do an example that talks about this is why it has this sort of 3-part structure wherever this is.
Like with a real example, so that people understand.
So this is I need to make this bigger. This is effectively a real example of how it would work, right? There's a supplier presenting credentials to a potential buyer. You check the product. You check to see whether the supplier is in the register and get a public key of it, and registrar and so on. There's a bunch of steps that are described here that are real. They're the real use case.
Okay.
And it talks about how the grid is involved or not, and you'll notice the word optional is in here, because for most supply chain interactions, a known supplier is shipping stuff to a known buyer, right? On occasions, they establish a new relationship. A supplier gets a new customer, or a buyer looks for a new supplier. And in those instances, they're dealing with more unknown, and they might want to check stuff, right? But once they've established certainty around the participants and the keys they're using, everything else, then they can kind of move swiftly without these sort of optional extra checks about, are you in an authoritative registrar's registry? And is that authoritative registrar on the grid? Which are the 2 extra steps we're putting in here. But the other steps would then remain the same. So you'd basically verify the credentials. So the steps, you'd already have the public keys, you verify the credentials without having to go to the, is this actually genuine? Check. You've got keys from the prior checks that you've made, and then you confirm the deal. So it's sort of that's the template for pretty well all of the checks that we do, whether it's land, whether it's organization identity, or whatever. The DIA checks are the same. And somewhere, I know I've got something somewhere in this file I can't find in real time, is a data structure example of a Spanish registry. I'll look at it actually on another page.
Okay.
This example here is somewhat echoed also in the first about page. So if you go to the about written DIAs, when you scroll down this page, there's a that very long, what it's called a sequence diagram, join the grid, issue DIAs, empower trustworthy trade. There's a slightly more expanded version of that same use case in this one. So where the supplier ships goods and documentation to a buyer, there's some sort of goods receipt checks that are done. It notes that there's a digital identity anchor and country of origin of the supplier, checks it's signed by a registrar, checks the registrar is in a grid. And so there's a bunch of checks that are put in here that you can also wrap, as I did in the other example, with an option, because if you don't need to do it, you don't need to do it. If you already know your supplier, and they're using the same signature, the same keys, you don't need to kind of recheck. Well, you might be worried that they've lost their registration because they seem somewhat dodgy, in which case go ahead and check. And check every time if you want. So we have examples of how it's meant to be used, and there are more elaborative like words used in other parts of the website describing the same things. There's a lot of content in this website that's quite good about explaining these things. And I think in a sense the art is probably pointing people to the right places. What Steve's been very good in my experience of sitting on the UNTP calls, but a year or two ago now, was Steve was very, very good at using the content on the web pages to explain people how things work. So what he would do is he'd be having a conversation like this, he'd go out and he'd jump to a section of the website to show somebody how something works, which gives you confidence that the website explains some stuff that's worth understanding. And I think that's what I'd like to do more often myself, rather than creating a separate slide deck that says, you know, here's how you understand it. Actually, no, lean on the website content. And if it isn't there, then we need to improve the website content. But, you know, lean on that, find it in the website content. Most of what we need should already be here.
Okay.
Including the economic arguments, including the numbers of dollars and participants and all the other things. They're in here too. So it's anyway, that's where we're at. I don't know, I can't.
Okay, so just to, do you think we're ready for the public review, like considering Steve's
absolutely
suggestions that we should improve? Maybe is there anything else that we should improve?
So after the email that he sent us, which was this content here, I made some changes and I pinged Steve. I sent a message to Steve saying, look, I've done pretty well most of the changes and I think we're there. Steve's recheck confirmed that yes, he thinks that's pretty well there. He actually gave me one more flick on the pilot stuff, which I then addressed another thing. And that's when I created the whole separate subfolder called Sandbox and put everything in the Sandbox. And what I then said to Steve was my concern isn't so much that, to Hans's point, the problem isn't that people are reading the website and misunderstanding it and getting confused between test pilot data like Atlantis and real stuff. That's not the problem. The problem is we don't have enough real registrars participating. And that second problem is bigger than the first problem, right?
Yes,
I almost wish people misunderstand the website content because that would mean they're reading it. But at the moment, we don't have that. So what I suggested to Steve, well, we should actually spend more effort rather than fiddling with the pages of a website that people don't even read. We should actually be out there trying to talk to registrars, and that's what he's doing now at the conference he's at. It's a sort of for me that's more important. As is your conversations are your conversations with the land registry people in Europe, Alina,
yes.
and your own team in Registradores. Hey, Joe.
Sorry, Mike.
It's no worries. We've been going through the kind of changes since we last looked. So I found out a way. This is. I'll quickly rewind. So
actually, I think I told you that I have been invited as a speaker to the international CINDR, which is the International Congress of the Registers, but it will take place end of November, beginning of December. To explain them, yes, this is the problem.
We'll have lots of material. Well, it's not a problem. I think we'll have lots of material by then if we've gone through a recommendation process and we've got a publication and stuff. You would actually be presenting the recommendation if we've got that far.
Yes.
So that's cool. It's a nice time. This is sort of, but just to repeat myself a little, this is on my left is the original website, and on the right is the new website. And I was talking through the changes made to make it more friendly, as Steve was sort of suggesting, for the naive viewer as opposed to project participants. And all the stuff on the left is really about project participation, and the stuff on the right is about understanding what the heck grid is, and why should I be interested. So that's the sort of shift of ethos. So your question about are we ready for public review? I definitely think we are, and the reasons are we are 80, 90, 95, pick a number, % ready. We will never be, I hold this to be absolutely true, 100% ready. There is no such thing. We do not fear public review. Public review says, oh, you've made a mistake there, you've got a typo there, you go, oh, fantastic, we'll correct it. That's the essence. If there were no faults, you'd expect no public review comments. That's absurd, right? So you should expect some review comments, and hopefully there'll be some corrections and improvements we can make. But don't let good get in the way of, don't let perfect get in the way of good, as this phrase goes.
Just imagine if we were able to do something with the Department of Finance, John.
Well, that's an Australian conversation that Joe and I are having at the moment. Yes, that would be quite fun. That would be quite fun.
That could be one of our pilots, no?
Absolutely. The Department of Finance is the head agency that looks after the ATO, the Australian Tax Office, who are the holders of the Australian Business Number Registry.
Oh.
Okay, that's sort of where we're at. So Lena, you and I are in a private side channel thing with Steve Capel and Coloma around sort of are we ready yet? What do you think? That sort of stuff. So we can share with the group via Slack and the email group thingy what those comments are. But so far, I'm hopeful that by the end of tomorrow's meeting, my time tomorrow, we'll have a kind of clean sheet to say, yeah, it's, to my words before, it's not perfect, but it's good enough. And off you go. And Hans, I know you've got a whole link into the verifiable.trade organization and others. And, you know, obviously I'd hope for people like yourself to be able to sort of say, look, have a look at this. I've been part of the conversation. You don't need to give it any positive or negative endorsement, but, you know, just it's worth having a look at it would be useful, I'm sure, because you'll have different networks than others do on this call. Cool. Are we? Shall I stop the recording now? And yeah, I'll skip 1 second. Thank you very much. I will now stop the recording. This is so much harder than it should be. Stop.